I think that the state of the online freedom in Russia is quite a challenging topic because it's a very dynamic issue. If you try to follow what's going on in Russia around internet freedom, you can see new initiatives for new laws and new activity of the members of Russian Parliament, Russian Duma, almost on everyday basis. Some legislation still meets some opposition from other actors, so it's not that everyone get in automatically and approved automatically. So there are some struggles and there are some lobby from different bodies, and the internet companies still try to oppose some of the most radical legislation. But at the same time, on the monthly basis, we can see that more and more radical forms of law passed through the Russian parliament, and therefore the legal environment become more and more challenging for internet freedom. On the second layer of analysis is what's actually going on with the police and the courts and prosecution. So it's not about what kind of law we can see in Russia, but it's about how this law is implemented. And here there are also a lot of freedom and flexibility because the new laws are open for different forms of interpretation, and sometimes some remote regions in Russia take these laws very far. And now Russia is going to face this year parliament elections, and in 2 years we should expect for the presidential elections. So prior to elections we often see increase in this type of activity and more legislation and more prosecution. So I think that generally the situation is quite concerning. The major thing about the new legislation around the regulation of online extremism, that it's very open for different forms of interpretation, and it can be used by the police and by the prosecutors in order to restrict a lot of different things, relying on their political directive or relying on just their decision. So I think that the most concerning thing is not the law, not only the law, but the openness and this law for interpretation and the flexibility of implementation of the law depending on the political context. You still have an ability to go online, to post everything on your Facebook and to say everything wherever you want, but then you can face consequences. And therefore many experts, including one of the best experts on this field, Andrei Soldatov, they say that the major aspect of Russian internet regulation is self-censorship. One of the very significant changes in Russia is, first of all, the change in the structure of the ownership of major internet companies. So again, we should differentiate between specific cases when the companies are asked down to remove something and the general environment, to what extent the government is able to just give orders to these companies. The only international company that have a substantial presence in Russia is Google, and they find themselves under continuous pressure. Anarch School and the Internet Policy Observatory, together with some Russian partners and with Professor Eric Nisbet from the States, conducted quite a big study that I also took a part in this study. What I'm arguing in the paper that I wrote relying on this data, that we can see very successful construction of internet as a technology that associated with different forms of threat. If you have a very successful framing policy and the social construction of technology as a source of threat, if you construct internet as an enemy, and that's what happens because of these framing efforts, so obviously you would expect that the public will support the government around the different forms of internet regulation. So the problem is not only the institutions, the problem is not only about the authorities, the problem is not about only about the government, the problem is also about the public opinion, what people think about the internet, if they approach it as a threat or as something that can be associated with different forms of opportunities. So I think if we really want to understand the situation around Russian internet, we need to think about this notion of alternative space and to what extent the Russian internet was able to present alternative social and political and cultural space in the past, and to what extent today Russian internet is still able to provide this environment which can be considered as alternative political, social and cultural space. And I think that today this capacity is more limited. It's still there, people are still able to use it for these purposes, but the presence of state and the presence of Russian sovereignty and the capacity that is quite similar to the capacity to control offline space is manifested also online in Russian internet today.